So far we've talked about scales and we've talked about basic triad chords. And whenever I showed you how to make those chords, we talked about the first scale degree. So I mentioned, for example, how to find the C minor chord. And then I showed you how to first start with finding the scale, or actually just remembering the scale. And then how to count to 3 and 5 within that scale to find the third and the fifth of the chord, which gives us the C minor chord. But the C minor chord, of course, is not the only chord within this scale. We can use multiple chords in the C minor scale, and actually we can use multiple chords in any scale. And we can use a new chord for every scale degree. So in the case of C, the D has a chord, the E flat has a chord, the F has a chord, and all of those chords are going to be different. They're not all going to be major chords. So let's find all of those, and let's start with C major. So C major, very simple. That scale, and let's sequence that in. So I'm gonna start with the C note here, and that's going to be the first scale degree, and we're going to now harmonize this major scale. That's just simply what it's called if we build a chord on every scale degree. So here's the first one, the C major chord. Now let's go to the second scale degree, which is the D, and let's do our same trick. Like it's actually incredibly simple. We just use the same technique counting inside the scale. So we count to 3 and we count to 5. That gives us this chord. Now this happens to be a minor chord, and we can recognize that because it has 3 half steps between the tonic, between the root, and between the third, rather than 4 half steps. So this is why that exercise is good, to start to recognize these minor intervals, like minor thirds and major thirds, because then you can quickly tell that this is a minor chord. So let's add that here. Our minor chord has a D, an F, and an A. So the tonic, the third, and the fifth. All right, let's move to the third note of the scale, which is an E, and let's do the same thing. That's our third, and that's our fifth. So then we get this, and this is also a minor chord. So the first scale degree of C major, or actually any major scale, is a major chord. The second scale degree of a major scale is minor, and the third is also minor. Let's move to the fourth, the F. Now this, in all its triumph, is a F major chord. There. So far we've harmonized the first 4 scale degrees. Now let's move on. Let's move to the fifth. I'm gonna be a little bit faster and just fill these in, because I think you get the idea by now. We just count inside the scale. The fifth is also, as you might be able to tell, it's also a major chord. And then the sixth, which is note A, 6th scale degree of C, that's gonna be a minor chord, because 1, 2, 3, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. A, C, E. And then we get to the 7th scale degree. And this one, if we do the same thing, you've probably already noticed by the tone of my voice that something is gonna happen here. If we start on this B note, and then we count to 3, we land here on the D. So this is a minor third. And then we count to 5, and then you get to the F. So this one, normally for the major and the minor chords, this was a perfect fifth. But I also mentioned that a perfect fifth, it has the interval of, or not the interval, it has 7 half steps, and this one only has 6 half steps. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it's actually a diminished fifth, and this is called a diminished chord. And a diminished chord is a regular minor chord, but with a lowered fifth. So if we take the C minor chord, for example, which is not like that, looks like this. We have the 1, the minor third, and the perfect fifth. Now if we take that perfect fifth and we lower it a half step, then we get a diminished chord. And by itself, it sounds a little bit atonal, or it might sound a little bit weird or like a horror movie, because that's where they're used a lot. But this chord is very useful. One of the useful things about this chord is that we're going to see more of this in the functional harmony, but there's an interesting feature of this chord, and that is that it's a symmetrical chord. You can see that with both the major and the minor chords, the interval between the first and the third is different every time. So for a major chord, the interval is bigger between the tonic and the third, and then for a minor chord, the interval is smaller. But with this diminished chord, the intervals are the same. They're all minor thirds apart. So these are all the chords built upon a major scale degree. And we can play this right now. So we can choose from all of these chords when we want to make a progression in C major. And this order of the chords is always going to be the same. It doesn't matter if you're in C major or G major or A major. For all the major scales, the first chord is major, the second one is minor, the third one is minor, the fourth is major, the fifth is major, the sixth is minor again, and the seventh is diminished. All right, so that's for major scales. Now let's harmonize, as we call it quite fancily. Let's harmonize a minor scale, and let's stick with C. And that's not because I don't know any other keys, but that makes it easy to compare these keys with each other, to see which notes are different between minor and major. So our C minor scale, let's actually I'll just add it here so that we have it as a reference, because this one might be a little bit trickier to see right away. So this is the C minor scale. And now I'll just mute those notes and I'll put them up an octave so we have them as a reference there. All right, so let's start with the first note here, which is going to be a C, and then the minor third, and then the fifth. All right, that is the first chord. Then let's go to the D, and we count. Oh, sorry, I played the major scale. We count 1, 2, 3, so we get there, and then till 5. Now, here we might recognize the sound of this by now. We get a diminished chord as well. So let's put in those notes. So in a natural minor scale, the first chord is of course minor, but the second chord is diminished. And there's only one diminished chord in the whole major scale, and one in the natural minor scale. And for the major scale, we found it on the 7th scale degree, and for the minor scale, we find it on the 2nd scale degree. Right, so the 2nd scale degree of minor is diminished. That's one thing you can remember and repeat at parties to look cool. So let's continue with the 3rd scale degree, which is an E flat, and that happens to be a major chord. And then we go to the 4th one, which is an F, and that's going to be minor. And then we go to the 5th. I'm going a little bit faster here because I don't want to bore you guys with my Sesame Street-like counting, you know, with the 1, 2, 3, ABC. So now we have our first 6 chords. Let's see, and then we go to the 7th chord. And if you're confused about why I'm using these notes, just check out our scale here. I'm only using notes from the scale, and then I'm using those to count inside the scale. So for natural minor scales, this we've now harmonized a natural minor scale. And of course, if I want to put this in a different key, if we're working inside a DAW, it's very easy. We only need to select this and move it down to, for example, that A flat key. Sort of now you're using a very tricky key, but it was very simple. You just move the whole thing down. Right, so hopefully you get the idea of this by now, and also how to find chords inside a scale. Next, let's take a look into 7th chords. There's another thing we need to talk about. So far, we've talked about chords that have 3 notes, and we call them triads because of that. But of course, we can add a bunch more notes to our chords, and this is what happens in jazz a lot, and in fusion, and also just in classical music and pop music types. Now, the most common of these more note chords are 7th chords. And the 7th chords, they have an additional note just below the root. So there's 3 different types. There's the major 7th, the minor 7th, and the dominant 7th. So let's first check out the major 7th. So from the name, we can already sort of tell that we need a major chord. So let's start with that. Let's use our C scale. So we had C, E, and G. The tonic, or the first, and then the third, and then the fifth. So a major third and a perfect fifth. A beautiful C major chord. And then we need to add the 7th. Now, this is, once again, if we know our scale, this is very easy, because the B was the 7th note of our scale. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and your knows how to count. So that is going to be the 7th in our chord. So that's the only thing we need to add. We have a major chord, and we add that B, we get a major 7th chord. It has an incredibly smooth sound. And again, we can find that in other scales as well. Let's say we want to find that in A major. So A major, if we use the formula, we get this scale. So we from that we build our major chord. And then we go to the 7th scale degree, which happens to be a G sharp in this case. And we get a major 7th chord. Now, a quick way of finding this one is to just go a half step below your root. So if we have a C chord again, the note a half step below our root is a B, and that's going to be the major 7th interval. Right, so that's major 7th chords. Now, minor 7th chords, they work exactly the same, except that this time we choose a minor scale. So let's go with the C minor scale. And then we build from that our C minor chord. And then we add the 7th scale degree, which is the B flat. So for minor scales, the 7th is a whole step or 2 half steps below the root. So if we take C and we lower it 2 half steps, we end up with a B flat. And that's our minor 7th. And then finally we have our dominant 7th chord. And that's an interesting one, because this one, it's a major chord, but it has a minor 7th on top. So we can build our major chord on wherever we want. Let's say we use C. And then we want to add a minor 7th. So rather than having this major 7th, we need to lower it another half step. And that gives us that chord, which creates an incredible amount of tension. And this is a very interesting chord to use, and we're going to talk a lot about this when we talk about functional harmony. But for now, those are the three 7th chords that we're going to use. Now, if you've been paying attention, you might think, well, if you can use a major chord with a minor 7th on top, couldn't you also use a minor chord with a major 7th on top? And you can, in fact, and that's what it sounds like, a minor chord, but then with a major 7th. And this chord does exist, as do a lot of chords, but it's not very functional, and we'll figure out what that means a little bit later on. It's being used in jazz a lot, but or not a lot, but it's being used in jazz sometimes. And we're not going to use it for now, but you're right that it is there. You can use it. It has a sort of a dissonant sound, but it has some other cool usages too. For now though, let's just focus on the major 7th, the minor 7th, and the dominant 7th, and then also the diminished chord. Alright, so that's it for the foundations part of this course. And this is really something, like all of these things I consider to be really fundamental knowledge to even start to work with music theory. Like a lot of people, when they're learning music theory, this is sort of where they stop. But like this point right now, we've only learned the vocabulary, which is a word that I cannot say very well. But after this point, that's when it really gets interesting, because now we can start using these techniques and actually start to talk about music, like how to build musical sections and how to bind these chords together. This is the point where we can start to play around with the language that we've learned, and we can start to write poems with it, to use a weird analogy. So that's what we're going to do next, and I'm very excited about that one. But just to make sure, before you go to that, make sure that you understand these things, because things are getting a little bit more complex from this point onwards.